It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a big episode just filled with all sorts of questions. We are going to talk about Mike Mazzulli's replacement at the ABC. We're going to talk about Renato Moicano. We're going to talk about Tapology and their brand new rankings. We're going to look at Martin Buday being released by the UFC. We're going to look at the UFC Qatar card. We're going to talk about Netflix and PFL and WWE and Jarrell Miller. But if you want access to all of those things, you're going to have to subscribe with your money because half of that will be behind a paywall. Now, I know we say this every single episode, but your subscriptions help us stay afloat. So we're not trying to be greedy. We're just trying to keep ourselves afloat. And we thank all of you for continuing to subscribe. John, how the heck are you?
Well, we thank all of them, except for the one or two people that know that we don't thank them, even though they do subscribe. There's one or two of you, you know damn well who you are. Pretty good. I think the most interesting thing, now we try to give as much free stuff as possible.
Yes.
We can't, we listen, this stuff takes effort, and we got lives. We could be doing other shit. So the little money we use a lot of it basically compensates me for the money I spend on court filings, because that shit gets expensive on Pacer too. But I think we have behind the paywall for the hardcores today is, I think, something very interesting about the Jarrell Miller's bankruptcy and lawsuit case, that will be good for a lot of people. But I'm doing good. But to get back on the question, I am doing good. Still in Minnesota, doing a lot of lame. I've turned into an old man. Me and the girlfriend went to a dinner theater event Saturday. I might have been. I was the one of the youngest people in the crowd, and she should have probably been stopped at the door and carded. I don't think they thought she was old enough to even be in there. So that was, but it ended up being entertaining. But that was the lame ass thing I did, the old man thing I did this weekend, and now I dropped her off. She went back to LA for a few days, and me and my mom are watching her cat. So that's the exciting news over here in Casa de Nash.
Well, over here, I'm also watching my old cat. I have a few cats, but my little old lady, my 15-year-old, has been very sick, and she got her very last dose of steroids and antibiotics today. So she is sitting next to me, which is a first. I do not ever let her in the same room while we're recording because she chirps. But she's pretty chill right now. She just got her meds, so she's pretty chill and laying down and being a good girl. But I just want to give fair warning. Both John and I have a cat next to us. So if you hear any weird little chirping, that's what it is.
Yes, it's the cat that's making the noise. Yes, exactly.
We have cheerleaders today. So in any event, let's get this puppy rolling. A new president was named to replace Mike Mazzulli at the ABC, the Associated Boxing Commissions. Who is it? And do we know anything about him?
Well, there's the annual convention, the ABC convention going on right now. They have their agenda published. There's a lot of interesting stuff going to be talked about. A presentation in support of the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act was originally listed as being taking place this week. I will see if it's still going to take place. I know the MMA-FA, Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association, I don't know why I stumbled this time. They have a presentation. So there's some interesting things going on there. We'll be paying attention. And one of the interesting things is they announced the replacement, the new president of the ABC, to replace Mike Mazzulli. And this new person is going to be, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with him, Timothy Shipman, who is the executive director of the Florida State Athletic Commission. He's been there since June of 2023, 2 years there, but he served in the as an assistant executive director before that for 7 years before that. So he's been in the Florida Commission for a while. And that's the new person. He is, and my understanding is he's got like 20 some years of experience in combat sports regulations in Florida. So he's very familiar with it. And he's, known probably one of the big reasons he got this is he's one of the people that helped spearhead the rebound in Florida, became Florida the center of combat sports for a while during the COVID pandemic. And so I think that's probably one of the major reasons he was elevated as director of an athletic commission, and probably one of the reasons he will be replacing Mike Mazzulli as the president. At least that's my guess why he'll be replacing him.
So is it fair to say that there's some kinship there between he and TKO?
Well, I guess it's fair in a sense that I think I don't want to imply a strong relationship. There really is, but I think they like his leadership at the athletic commission, especially with the way he let them get run over so they could put their events on in Florida and do what they wanted. And, there's a bunch of other stuff. He's had some regulations. He allows bare knuckle fighting in Florida. So he's allowed the expansion, but he's also kind of been a strict regulatory person on bare knuckle. So that kind of satisfies Zuffa's interest, because with slap fighting and everything, they like that on one hand, the commissions are open to letting other types of combat sports, especially ones that are being promoted by Zuffa, like slap fighting or, related to Zuffa people are doing it. But at the same time, they like some sort of strict regulations, because they don't like everybody else, having free reign to come in and enter the combat sports sphere. So I am sure they're happy with his type of leadership.
Matt Brown, he criticized Renato Moicano recently. It was a scorching criticism, too. What was his point of contention, and do you agree with him?
Well, his major point of contention, my understanding of it, I did listen to the interview, not the interview, but his show, The Fighter and the Writer, and with Damon. And what I think his big contention is that, it's basically you're putting on a show for people that are just businessmen. They don't really care what why you're doing it. You're not really winning any brownie points. And that was his big, and I agreed with a lot of Brown's points, although I will say, and I said this before, if that's the principles that Moicano believes in and he's standing by him, then good for him. Although I'm not sure why he waited to get the claim, to reject the claim, instead of opting out of the lawsuit earlier. And when the opportunity presents, is he going to opt out of the Johnson case? Because potentially, if they have a similar settlement, he stands to make a lot more in the Johnson case. So that's my question on that. If his principles are so strong, then I'm sure he'll announce that he is going to not accept anything in the Johnson case. The one thing that Brown said that I thought was very astute and was channeling a point of view that Carlos Newton says, that Carlos Newton came up with this original kind of analogy, or this original viewpoint of it, is that promoters should be competing over fighters. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's what we don't have with the UFC. And the full Carlos Newton analogy is that promoters should be fighters should be competing for championships, and promoters should be competing for fighters who are competing for championships. And that would create the most amount of competition and the best, situation for fighters. And as, Carlos Newton's point, when Matt Brown pointed out, is that it's the reverse of that in MMA, is that the UFC does not compete for fighters. Really, fighters compete to win the favor of the UFC. Fighters compete to get in the UFC so they can get a chance to fight a title, because the UFC controls the title, and so they have a barrier to entry on the title. The situation is turned up on its head in mixed martial arts compared to what would be the optimal system for fighters. And it comes in, this is kind of timely, this discussion, because it goes very much hand in hand with the discussions of amending the Ali Act and changing what's going on in boxing, and comparing that to what's going on in MMA, and how some people say MMA is better, but at the same time, we have a system set up where the promoter has all this incredible control over the fighters, because they also control the titles and access to the titles. And so again, fighters are competing to get competing for the promoter to sign them so they have a chance to fight for the title when, according to Brown and Newton, and I hold the same opinion, it should be the reverse.
Tapology, and we're going to keep along the same pathway here because this sort of fits in. But Tapology just announced that they'll be doing their own independent ranking system. Now, I want to note, Smoogie on Twitter put out something that was inaccurate. He said that if you want access to anything past the top 5, it's paywalled. It is not. They just ask that you build a free account to look at the rest of the rankings, but it is free. So I just want to put that out there in case you saw Smoogie's tweet. It is not paywalled. So, bearing that in mind, what are your thoughts on Tapology doing their own independent rankings?
Well, I should be clear. I should come clear. I should say that why they were trying this out several weeks ago, they gave me a demonstration with an embargo, so I wouldn't share it. They just wanted my opinion, and they let me see the test run for a few weeks. And so I already gave my opinion. So I will tell them what I told the Tapology people. I'll tell you guys the exact same thing. I thought the explanation of the system they were using, I thought that was a very credible system, better than with the UFC. They have explanations. They have strict guidelines of what happens to the fighters. Like they have an algorithm that judges, I can't remember, like the last 6 fights, the wave fights, the more recent fights, more than older fights. The longer ago a fight is, the less valuable it is, and then eventually drops off on, where your current ranking. So they're trying to come up with a better system to rank UFC fighters, and a system that rates all the UFC fighters. People can kind of see where they are in the UFC. And all that, I'm very much in support of that, although I still think it should be pieced with objective rankings that are done by individuals. I think that's the best system, where you have kind of like the consensus rankings with SB Nation, where a bunch of people do it, because you do get in some kind of weird situations that just do not feel right, even though the algorithm or whatever says that's how it's supposed to be rated. But, if we're trying to do the college BCS system, this kind of fits that. So I thought all that was good. But my big complaint was, and this is always going to be a problem, is it only rated UFC fighters. And what that means is that by only ranking UFC fighters, is it doesn't serve the purpose of giving more leverage to fighters, which is, one of the hangups we have on this show, is we'd like to give more leverage to the fighters. Because the same problem exists that happens right now in the UFC. The public basically only pays attention to the UFC rankings. And so if a fighter has a contractual problem with the UFC, leaves the UFC or holds out anyway, UFC drops them off the rankings, well, they're now out of the public eye and they've lost a great deal of leverage. And so it would be nice if they had rankings that listed fighters across multiple promotions. And so when a fighter, and this would also help fighters in other promotions, so when a fighter leaves the UFC and goes to another promotion and the fans come to look at the rankings, they see, oh, this guy is still the number 3rd, number 10th, number 12th fighter in the world. I wonder what he's doing. He doesn't suddenly disappear and the void is filled by a UFC fighter. The same as the reverse, where other promotions, they would feel probably compelled to make good offers, better offers than they do on some of their fighters, because they do not want to gap. If the public is, a large number of the public are using these rankings and they see that their best rated fighter is coming towards free agency, is going to leave, they might offer a much larger amount to that guy to make sure he stays. So I would have preferred, I really, really wish they had done a system where they had included fighters across promotions. And I've talked about this in the past, that one great thing like the Mixed Martial Arts Journalists Association could have done, or all the media sources, is kind of get together and say, we are going to create an AP style poll like they do in college, and we are going to use that exclusively and not use these promotional rankings, which are just, again, it's self-contained walled gardens that give the promoters more power. So we're going to do one that covers all promotions. I wish the Tapology done it. I wish all the websites would do something like that. I guess the websites, a lot of them do have their rankings. MMA Fightings has rankings. Sherdog has rankings. MMA Junkie has rankings across promotions, but they don't get much momentum. And I think if they work together on a consensus style rankings where everybody shared them, all the sites, then they would work much better. But that's my big complaint. I actually think it's as an attempt to try to improve the UFC rankings, I thought the explanation and what I was seeing looked very a noble attempt. But I can't get past my big complaint that, again, it's the same walled garden concept that we are limiting ourselves to one promotion, and that just hands more leverage to that promotion.
So we're back to Fight Matrix rankings.
So, well, we'll wait and see. Yes, I use Fight Matrix for most things because it's the only one that does all promotions. But I am somewhat intrigued to compare this to UFC rankings over an extended period of time. And maybe, I mean, just on the UFC front, maybe this will shame the UFC to use these guys at the rankings if they end up looking much better than the current UFC rankings. But I am also just not a fan of UFC rankings.
I'm not a fan of UFC using anyone's rankings exclusively, because then we end up in the same situation with pressure being applied, et cetera, and then the rankings start looking the way that they do now, where that unranked people are becoming ranked by fighting other unranked people.
Well, if they'd stick to their algorithm, I don't think it'd be a problem. But the big problem is the UFC won't care. Because it's a self-contained system and they can ignore the rankings. There's no such thing as a mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
None of that stuff matters to the UFC. And again, if you have a contractual problem, they don't like you, they can eliminate you from the rankings. And then what? And then you're out of the rankings and no one cares about you anymore.
Yeah. And I feel like if someone is being contracted to provide those rankings, that sort of thing could happen. Even if it's an algorithm, well, change your algorithm. I feel like any amount of pressure could be applied. I mean, look what they've done to the media space. It's crazy.
Yeah, we just go back to the same thing, though. I just wished.
Yes.
I think there should be a rankings that includes everybody. I don't know why we're obsessed with the UFC only because we want to pretend that it's somehow like an NFL or NBA.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's just not the same system at all.
At all. Martin Buday. Let's talk about him, or as Michael Bisping calls him, Buday, was recently cut from the UFC despite having a very, very good run and coming off a win. What's the problem with Buday? Well,
this actually goes hand in hand with our last conversation about the rankings. Buday was ranked 12th at heavyweight in the UFC's own rankings. So here's a top fighter. Now, in many ways, people are like, well, I can't believe they cut him. And other people are like, well, it makes sense they cut him. He's not exciting. He's not interesting. The UFC is a business. And I kind of agree with that take that it's a business. But that's kind of the problem, because you're in many ways, you could argue this is somehow a restraint of trade with Buday, because here's a chance to progress in this sport, to have his career ascend to a level where he could be the top of the sport, is dependent only on the UFC, dependent exclusively, I should say, on the UFC agreeing to give him the chance. And why is that? Because the UFC controls the rankings of the UFC fighters. They have all the top fighters under contract. They control their titles. There's no chance to ever fight the best guys without getting signed to the UFC, because the UFC is, for all practical purposes, a unified fighting organization instead of a unified boxing organization. And so that opportunity is limited only to people under contract with the UFC. And so his ascent, his progress in his career is denied because the UFC just doesn't want to sign him because he is not exciting enough. And that's why I do have a problem with promoters owning their rankings. They can engage in restraints and trade where they prevent people from having the opportunity to do better in their career because they own the structure of the sport itself. And if you had a separate system where there was a sanctioning organization, and I know a lot of fans freak out about that. They're like, oh my God, we don't want to be boxing. You could create a UFC of sanctioning organizations where the UFC sanctioning organization is the one everybody wants to use, the one everybody accepts has the best rankings, the one everybody wants to be the champion, but all promoters, all fighters could be ranked by it and have a chance to ascend and take the title. Well, then, if the UFC finds him boring, fine, they don't have to sign him. But his progress, his ascent to the top is not denied because it's not tied to one single promoter. And I think that's the example. And that's the sin here with him, is because you can say that, no one wants to pay to watch him fight. That's fine. No one has to pay to watch him fight. I'm not here to force promoters to pay people a ton of money if no one wants to pay watch him fight. But I am here to say that as a fighter, if he keeps winning and keeps beating people, he should have the chance to rise in the ranks and get a chance to fight for the crown, based purely on his meritocratic performance, not on the fact that he is either exciting or he is consented to the UFC contractual demands or any of those things.
UFC recently announced their Qatar card. What kind of site fees are we looking at for that event?
Well, you got to imagine it's on par with what their other site fees they are getting in the region, which is supposedly around 20 million or so, 15 to 20 million for United Arab Emirates, 20 to 25 million for a fight night for Saudi Arabia, 35 million, I think it was, for a pay-per-view in Saudi Arabia. So these are massive site fees. So I'm guessing in that $15 million ballpark for Qatar. But what's interesting, having talked to a bunch of people, is apparently the way the Gulf works. An example that seems to have been what happened to One Championship when they had an event in Qatar. They were originally, my understanding was they were being offered $6 million site fee, tremendous site fee. And what Qatar does, just like supposedly the Saudi Arabia does, is you pitch the card to them. They have a list of fighters. They approve the fighters. And then if those fighters aren't on the card, there's a deduction on the value of the card. So let's say, there was an event a few years ago. Remember, they were first going to go in Saudi Arabia, and the main event got canceled, and then they postponed the card. Well, it seems like that was probably a good reason why they postponed it, because 40% of the money was removed or something like that because they didn't have the main event they promised. And so the UFC decided, you know what, why don't we wait to do this card later so we can get the full amount? With the case of with One, apparently they couldn't get the fighters that they had said, and the amount kept getting knocked down. And the final amount, instead of being 6 million, ended up being like $1.5 million, give or take. So they got much, much less than they were supposed to get. And this explains why when they go to Saudi Arabia, PFL makes sure they have a stacked card with Francis Ngannou and all these other guys, because they're not getting free money from these the Saudis and these Gulf states. They are getting a large amount of money, but it's tied to specific fighters being there on the card. And so if they fall out, you have to find a replacement that's adequate that they'll accept. Otherwise, a big chunk of that money disappears. So they're not just handing you free money for any crap. They have specific demands. And so based on the demands, based on who's fighting on that Qatar card again?
Oh, let me pull it up. I'm sorry, I didn't have that information, but keep going while I look it up for you.
That's right. I'm guessing they have a pretty decent card. And I'm guessing that the ballpark figure would be in the $15 million ballpark for that site fee, which is, compared to a fight night in the United States, that's triple what you're getting in the United States. And then you add in the licensing fee you're getting from ESPN and some international fees. They might even be higher than that. I mean, if there's now competition between the Gulf states over these events, that site fee rate might have increased even further than it was before. So 20 million might not be out of the picture, which is absolutely insane to think about. That they are paying what should be a pay-per-view, like a top-notch pay-per-view event type site fee. When I mean top-notch, I mean like, John Jones main eventing or, something like that, or Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia level of event. And we are getting that for fight nights in the Gulf.
Are you ready for who's going to be on it?
Yes, let me know.
To be determined versus to be determined.
Okay, so I'm betting they have a list of pretty decent fighters on that, because so far the Gulf State fight cards have been better, much better than the American ones on average.
Netflix, their VP, still isn't convinced on buying the rights to a, quote, full season sports package. Do you think that there's a possibility that this is smoke and mirrors to hide the fact that maybe they are considering a full package?
I mean, it's possible, it's conceivable, but I tend to believe them. I do think there's a difference between pro wrestling is because of the soap opera nature can fill up a weekly show, and it has a consistent number of viewers because the same people tune in every week to see the soap opera. Whereas fight night type cards, after you get watered down, there's just a lot of people that don't care about any generic MMA event or boxing event. And so I just don't think they think it's worthwhile to have those things on Netflix, where they want the big spectacles that are going to drive large numbers. And so I think it is likely that they have no interest in full seasons for other sports, but also full seasons, the full package for MMA. I think that's a strong indicator. They plan to do a few events per year. 4 has been the suggestion. And that I'm not the one that I'm interested too is how many of these events will it be a different number of events that are boxing and a different number of MMA? Or are they going to have it both the same? Just, pick the bigger MMA event or the bigger boxing match, depending which one's available. That would be interesting. Also be interesting if somehow TKO locks up the rights to Netflix away from everybody else. The word has been that Netflix will not give in to that demand. They don't want that. But you see TKO or see Turki Al-Sheikh talking to MVP, who's one person that Netflix supposedly likes because he can generate these kind of spectacles. And you wonder if maybe there's some sort of agreement happening between these parties to kind of deny everybody else the opportunity to get on Netflix. So
MVP.
I do think
MVP, you said that they were talking to MVP because that's one person that they like him. So I'm assuming you're referring to Jake Paul as MVP.
Yes, Jake. Sorry, I should have been more specific. MVP Promotions, Jake Paul because of Mike Tyson and because of Serrano and Taylor. My understanding is Netflix looks at him as someone not all the time. They don't agree to all his fights, but they look at him as someone that can do the type of spectacles that draw eyeballs.
PFL, they seem to be making great strides in content quality for their cards. Can they possibly unsink their ship?
No. I mean, it helps. It helps to have better quality. And this might sound mean because they are putting on a better product and no one seems to care. But the problem is you got to have the fighters that people care about to get them interested in the product in the first place. And they got to go back to the days they're having these tournaments, these seasons. That alone isn't going to do it. You got to go back to when Strikeforce announced the Grand Prix heavyweight tournament. People got really excited because they knew who those heavyweights were. And I think what's PFL's got to do, and this is the problem, is just the fighters are not available in the market. They're all locked up with the UFC. The key ones, they just do not have enough on their own, is they have enough fighters on their events that fans are aware of, fans are interested in, and they can't be viewed as over the hill too. They got to be viewed as relevant fighters, and they're just not that many available. If they had that, after a while, the increased product quality, increased, improved prospects, all that stuff would help because the fans would stick around and become interested in them. But they're not going to tune in. The general fan is not going to tune in unless you get them to tune in with people they're aware of.
We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about WWE because they just wrapped up their SummerSlam event, which was a couple of days over the weekend, just finished up Sunday night. They're planning to do some more 2-night events in the future, adding to SummerSlam and WrestleMania. Okay, those are the only 2 multi-night events that they hold currently. Do you think that their greed will finally eventually bite them in the ass?
I mean, this is a question for wrestling fans. Are they tired of this?
Yeah.
I don't know if they are or not. Are they? Well, that they are.
There's a lot of wrestling fans that are piping up that they don't want to have this.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like something to be enjoyable. It should be a one-day event. Even then, it always struck me when I would tune into Twitter and there's a major pro wrestling event that it's like an 8-hour fucking event. That I mean, I didn't know how they could survive that. Then you do it for 2 nights. Okay, that's just absurd.
And then you raise the price because you're giving them 2 nights, and you raise ticket prices too.
Well, I mean, yeah, this has. I mean, I can understand maybe one event per year that's a special weekend event. Everybody gets excited because it's 2 nights, but to spread it out, that seems like you are definitely milking it too much. And I mean, I would, but you know what? Didn't Turki Al-Sheikh say he wants to do kind of a several night boxing event coming up? And he did do that in some ways, although it was 2 different locations. He did do that with Canelo in the Times Square event, but if he does multiple events in a week in one location, on a rare occasions, it can work. When the UFC did it for Fight Night for UFC 200, and they had the Ultimate Fighter finale, and they had another event was a championship fight. I think it was RDA versus Alvarez before, or Cyborg. I can't remember the order of the bouts, but they had 3 events in a row before 2 events, and then UFC 200 on Saturday. I thought that was kind of interesting because it was a one-time thing. Once a year I could see, but I'm not a wrestling fan, but I'm happy to hear that there's maybe potentially some backlash, because it sounds like those guys are getting abused over there. The fans, that is. The milk.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!